Hi, I'm Jeff Blauette, Cooperative Farmers Elevator Technical Agronomist, and I thought we'd probably, on this week's Field Friday segment, discuss pollination and how to evaluate how it went on your field and on your hybrids. We've had plenty of heat and drought stress. That can be tough on this time of year for this corn to pollinate and early grain fill, so I thought we'd probably show you how to evaluate your own. Okay, now that we've grabbed a few ears out of our field, I want to talk about, first thing you need to do is grab ears that actually have brown silk out of your field. If there's pollen out there but there really isn't any brown silk, you might be a little bit too early to tell how pollination went. Once the silk grabs some pollen, sends it down to that ovule and creates that kernel, that silk instantly dies and basically starts to dry. So first thing is you got to make sure you're at least that far along to really get any good read on how pollination went. Next thing you want to do is, it's nice to have I like to have a good sharp knife. You can try and carefully husk it back from the tip like you do with sweet corn. The problem with that is you a lot of times can grab silks that might still potentially be attached in that action of taking those husks off. So that kind of gives you maybe a little bit of a false read potentially on how it went. But I like to take my thumb and kind of feel where that butt of that ear begins and take a good sharp knife, and as all safety usually goes, cut it away from you, not towards you. And then take a look, are you actually cutting into the butt of the ear, or is there still part of the husk there? So I didn't quite get it close enough that time. So now we've got past the end of the husk, and so the next step that makes it easier, you can peel them back one by one. That works too. To speed the process up, I like, if you got a good sharp knife tip, kind of slice it down from the butt to the tip, and you can kind of start to peel those away pretty quickly, and it's a lot less of a hassle. So you get down to that last layer too, you still want to kind of be careful so you don't peel silks away that aren't pollinated but can be ripped off. So you can even see in this one, inside of that husk, those silks are brown, the ones that have been pollinated. So you kind of want to, shake that ear around a little bit, because those silks are still in there. They may not be attached, but they're just going to hang there. And you'll get a good feel for where those ears are pollinated to. A silk will only attach to that kernel until a pollen grain goes down there, and after that you can kind of grab a silk that's still hanging on and see once why it's still there. If it looks like it's attached to a kernel, like some of these, there are some kernels that did not pollinate on this one, but not too bad. But you'll a lot of times after when you get to this stage, this corn's maybe been pollinated probably a week. This is a 101-day hybrid planted the 8th of May. You're probably looking at, within the last week, the actions happened. So these kernels have just started to develop when they got pollinated. So you can start pulling those away and see where each silk goes to. Pollination looked like it happened pretty well on this ear. There are some towards the tip that maybe didn't pollinate, but not too bad. I expect though we're going to see some more tips. When we get this pollination process done, that's the first step of the really important time for this corn. The next step is probably the first 10 days after pollination, which we're probably halfway into that maybe with this ear. 10 days to 2 weeks after pollination is kind of when a lot of times you might see potentially some tip abortion, where we call it tip back. These kernels pollinated, but under this heat and drought stress that we've been under, we had a little shot of rain go through, but it was disappointing. Most places only got a few tenths in our territory. It didn't exactly bust the drought by any means. Now we have cooled off, which will definitely help, but we can still abort kernels back on the tip of that ear. Just because it pollinated does not mean that it's going to make a kernel. What you'll see if that happens later on, and maybe we'll visit that in a few weeks and see if we can show some of that, but you'll have that red cob. You can tell the kernel pollinated, but it just shrunk down, so it's just a flaky little yellow capsule that shrunk away to nothing. So that tells you pollination happened, but early grain fill was where the stress hit it, or where that plant couldn't take it anymore. The corn plant and the ear is designed to make sure it can handle as many, or finish as many kernels that it absolutely can. and in doing that is trying to create as many offspring as it possibly can. That's how Mother Nature had it evolved. So if it has to abort 20% of the kernels on the tip to make sure that it can finish those that are farther down that ear, it'll do that. So that's what this drought stress will do to us. I expect this year we're going to see a difference in the hybrids that can handle drought and the ones that can't. Your drought tolerance rating on your hybrids might be the most important attribute of that corn this year, as far as will it succeed or will it be a disappointment. So that's kind of something to look at. A couple other notes on pollination. The first silks to emerge out of the tip of that ear, those are actually coming from the butt first. The butt silks emerge first, and then the last ones to emerge are the tip kernels. If it doesn't pollinate the tip, that's because pollen started dropping off of those tassels and pollen shed was over before those last silks emerged, and if there's no pollen out there, obviously you're not going to pollinate it. So that's kind of how you get that, tips that didn't pollinate. It's generally where the stress shows up as far as that time of year goes. So yeah, go out and look in your fields. You can also get a real early, it's not a great time to do a yield estimate. You can get kernel rows around, that's determined obviously, and you can see that. You can see how many kernels are pollinated, but you don't know how much tip back is going to happen, so you probably can't get a real good yield estimate for a while yet. But you can kind of start to see how things are developing. What we need to hope for now is probably some cooler weather with some moisture, some less stressful conditions that'll allow that tip to continue to develop and not abort. On lighter soils that are running out of nutrients, maybe nitrogen when it's trying to really pack a lot of stuff into these kernels, that could cause some stress too, that will lose some yield. So keep an eye on it, go out and look in your fields and see what kind of things you're seeing, and see what kind of yield potential at the top end you may have. That'll be this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.